Hi, this is Jimmie Bise, and welcome to the Funny Science Fiction Podcast.
The podcast that's the reason why Thanos snapped his fingers. As our guest today is author, blogger, and former Jeopardy contestant, Jimmie Bise. So heads up, Jimmie, now that we know that you've been on Jeopardy, our quiz at the end of the show won't be all that easy. But who knows? We've been wrong so many times before.
Welcome to the show, Jimmie.
I'd like to point out, by the way, that I didn't win, so let's not make it too tough. I was a contestant, but I wasn't a winning contestant. So,
but you passed the contestant quiz to make it on the show, so obviously you've got some brains.
It was actually my stunning good looks.
So therefore, you're above us who are still using Velcro for our shoes. So,
I upgraded to elastic.
Oh,
you guys have Velcro? I'm wearing.
We need to play the Weird Al song. I lost on Jeopardy. That was one of my picks.
I will tell you quick. My friends, I have some friends who actually recorded the episode and made me a DVD. They actually edited it and made me a DVD. And for the little menu screen, they used the beginning loop from "I Lost on Jeopardy" for the beginning loop on that. And when I heard it, I'm like, "Oh, thanks, guys. That's just awesome." It was awesome.
So nice.
Yeah,
your friends sound amazing, and I need to meet them. All right.
You need more people like that in your life.
Exactly. Those are the greatest kind to have. All right. So, Jimmie, one of the things I love to do with our creative guests is to talk with them about their influences, what drives them, what motivates them, what got them to be where they're at. So let's talk about it. What are the things that influenced little Jimmie to grow up and to be the wonderfully creative writer that we have before us now?
That's a hell of a question. And
You're welcome.
I actually expected it and thought about it and realized that I don't have a great answer. I know that other authors will come up with these just wonderful, and everyone will go, "Oh, that's honestly." I like monsters and spaceships and the shadows in the dark and elves and dwarves, and I read Tolkien and I read Sherlock Holmes and I watched Battlestar Galactica when I was 10, and I wanted to be a Viper pilot. And I mean, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer or a baseball play-by-play announcer or a member of G.I. Joe. And I was really kind of crushed when I found out they weren't hiring, and then a little more crushed when I found out they weren't real. But I liked all that. I liked all that stuff, and my folks kind of encouraged me to have an imagination, and not just have. Every kid has an imagination, but you can discourage kids from using their imaginations. And my folks, when I was young, they never really discouraged me from using my imagination. So I would write stories about rockets, and I would go out in the backyard, and I would, climb up in the swing set, and it would be a spaceship, or it would be an airplane, or I would be on safari somewhere. I just liked that stuff, and I don't have a particularly like brilliant reason for this. I loved it. And then when it came to my writing, I love short stories. I've always loved short stories. I would rather read a short story collection than a novel. And I've kind of going back to reading like the little Sherlock Holmes stories, which were serials in a magazine. And I read all that stuff. So that's kind of what I write now. I write about, creepy things and scary things and fun things, and sometimes rocket ships. And I tend to write short stories. So I just write now what I really loved when I was a kid. And maybe if I'm lucky, if I'm super, super, super lucky, some other kid will find something I've written and he'll dig it and he'll go, "Well, that dude wrote stuff like that, and so I'll write stuff like that." That's kind of the only real hope here. Otherwise, I'm just writing stuff that I liked when I was 7.
great.
I'm okay with that. You said that you don't have a good answer for that, but actually, I think that's a wonderful answer.
That was a brilliant answer.
Yeah, because you're talking about the things that you liked as a kid, and frankly, if those are things that can inspire you as you move forward, then I think that's a win.
Definitely.
Because you've allowed your imagination to follow you through the rest of your life. You didn't kill it when you became an adult. And I think that's the fault of many people today, is we kill our imaginations as we grow up, and we're like, "Oh, well, we're adults now, we can't have fun." And so I love the fact that you've held on to that.
Well, almost, because in truth, I did. In truth, for a good 30 years or so, I did kill my imagination. I was doing the practical guy, doing the practical, solid, stable job, and still professionally am. I was a very stable, boring been there forever kind of job that, quite honestly, I don't like, but it pays my bills, so there I am, and that's fine. But I got talked out of a lot of stuff by being responsible and being an adult and growing up and being serious and having your mind on serious things. And maybe 10 years ago, maybe not even quite that often, I looked at myself and decided that, man, I missed all that other stuff. And I wondered, and I still, by the way, I still wonder today if I have killed some of that beyond hope of revival. But I really kind of pulled that stuff out and revived it and said, you know something, it's finally okay for me to be, I might say, in my 50s now, and to love stories about elves and dwarves and rocket ships and people slinging swords, and it's kind of okay. The kind of thing that I would tell people is that there are a ton of influences on you to give all that stuff up. Mm-hmm. And you can still be a responsible adult. I'll put the big air quotes around it. You can still be a responsible adult, right? And love all that stuff. You can do both. And if you have that love, do not, under any circumstances, give it up, because it is not easy to come back. And when it does, it's not quite what it was. You kind of have to make do with your choices. So I did give it up for a while, and I kind of feel now that I'm pedaling a little harder than I need to, just to make up for lost time. But yeah, it's just, yeah, if you got it, keep it. People are going to try to ask you to give it up, but you don't have to. You just don't. You can be a perfectly responsible, well put together adult who loves their family and friends and who is responsible and pays their bills and is good in the community. And you can be a big giant goofball who loves rocket ships and runs around with a lightsaber. You can totally do that. And in fact, I personally argue you probably should.
Case in point, I just got this in the mail today, my brand new Thor hammer. So
nice.
Yeah, and I think too, as a young parent, looking at my daughter is 2.5. We are hitting peak imagination play. Like it is like the prime imagination time. And you do have that outside force with they shouldn't do that. They shouldn't. And no, they should. No. They're kids. You should let them have that Sam's Club box and have it be in your living room for 4 days because it's a school bus.
Right.
And then it's a rocket ship. And then I don't know what else it was today, but it's in the middle of my living room and she loves it.
Yeah. There you go.
And I should be able to sit in that school bus with her and be excited and have that imagination. And that is so cool that you're like, no, do it. Go, be a nerd. That's what we're supposed to do.
And the best part of that is when you get into playing with your 2.5-year-old daughter and you say something and she turns around and goes, no, mommy, that's not how it works.
Oh, I know.
You're like, whoa, sorry.
I'm apparently play imagination wrong.
You know, I didn't realize I was violating the rules there. You know?
So in one of your poems, The Atomic Monster, I'm presuming is inspired by a certain atomic lizard?
Yes, a certain atomic lizard that I was concerned would be under copyright, so I didn't want to name, even though the rhymes are so easy.
They are. So my husband and I actually recently watched Godzilla King of Monsters because Godzilla vs. Kong comes out soon.
Yes.
So which Godzilla movie is your favorite and why? There are so many options. Like, I didn't realize how many Godzilla movies there were.
Yeah. I don't have a favorite one. I will say that the original Godzilla movie, not the American remake with Raymond Burr, but the original one, is absolutely terrifying. It is not a fun, happy Godzilla movie. It is terrifying. It is a story of an unstoppable force that just shows up, wrecks Tokyo, and a guy has to kill himself to end the threat. And, spoiler alert, but it was a 60s, yeah. So okay, let's everybody watch.
It's been more than 48 hours. Spoilers don't work anymore.
Right. But I loved the ones where you could get like where you'd get King Ghidorah and Mothra would show up, and there was, I cannot remember which Godzilla movie is. I'm probably going to have to like turn in my geek card at least for a couple days, but there's one where Godzilla, they need Godzilla and Rodan and Mothra to team up against King Ghidorah, and Godzilla and Rodan don't want to, and so the movie literally grinds to a halt while they have this like UN style negotiation. And like the little Mothra girls are translating the whole thing, and Mothra is trying to get Godzilla and Rodan to work together, and they don't want to work together, and he's trying to negotiate the peace, and you're like, could we just do more monster stomping? I will say this, the 2014 Godzilla movie, which I saw in the theater and I cheered like an 8-year-old boy. The airport scene, when you get that long pan up Godzilla and you get to his head and that Godzilla roar just blasts out of the speakers, and I cheered and clapped my hands like a little kid. But it was such, every time you thought you were going to get a good monster fight, they would go deal with the stupid human beings. Like, I don't care about the stupid human beings. Just go away and let's have giant monster fights. I'm here for giant monster fights.
If I wanted to watch people, I would watch a people movie.
Right. I'd watch, something. I like Cloverfield.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
I actually really, really like Cloverfield. And one day, one of my goals, when I get the resources to do it, is to make an audio drama like Cloverfield, which is a ground level, alien monsters have invaded the earth, and the entire point of view is from a person or maybe two people who are dealing with that. So it's very Cloverfield level, and I like that point of view if that's what you're telling me it is. If you're telling me, okay, there's a giant monster, but we're going to see it from, and I even think J.J. Abrams said, I wanted to do Godzilla, but from the point of view of the people in the city. And I'm like, okay, I'll watch that. But then when you say, I'm going to give you a Godzilla movie, I better not watch Godzilla fighting a monster fight on a television cutaway scene. I better not, because I'm gonna be a little irked. And it's like he's not the monster we deserve.
Exactly.
But he's the monster we have. Or something like that.
And the singing is always good in those early Godzilla movies.
There are a couple theme songs, especially in the later Godzilla movies, where if you get the English translations of the theme songs, they are just so like, Godzilla is here, stop being cowards, you humans, and clean up your rooms and be productive, or Godzilla, and you're like, what is this?
Godzilla just tell me to clean my room?
In my room, Godzilla theme song by way of Monty Burns or something. What are you trying to sneak personal responsibility into my monster movie? I will not have this.
Godzilla now under contract by your mother.
So, Jimmie, I wanted to ask you about your book. One Hungry Werewolf and Other Monstrous Rhymes, available on Amazon and good bookstores everywhere, I'm sure. So now I noticed in there, I was looking over some information about it, and you coined the word creepy-dorable, which I loved. Maybe you can tell us about what creepy-dorable means and how your book helps people feel better about their relationships with monsters.
I like creepy stories. I like stories that make you look behind you. I like stories that make you wonder when you turn the last light off in your house. I like, when I was a kid, even as a younger teenager, when I was a kid, I would not want to go to bed like most kids do when they're supposed to. But I was always very sure that I needed to go to bed before my parents went to bed, because when I was going to sleep, the light would be on in the living room and I would hear the TV and I would kind of hear the murmuring of them talking. But if I was still awake when they went to bed, then all the lights in the house were off and I could hear all the nighttime noises of the house popping and settling, or cooling off and creaking, and the noises outside. Those are not good noises. They just aren't. You think that's just a pop of a joist in the roof. It's not. There's something in the attic. Right. There's always something in the attic.
Going back to that imagination, right?
Yeah, but there's always stuff like that. But one of the things I do dislike about a lot of scary stories, and even scary stories written for kids, is how they are unremittingly bleak. They are just absolutely just horrible, grinding. You feel just terrible afterwards. And I wanted to do monsters that were creepy but also beatable in a way. Monsters that were creepy, but you didn't have to be terrified of them. I think monster stories a lot, especially for kids, go back to things that like Tolkien said about fairy stories. And I can't remember, I think like C.S. Lewis also wrote about stories, is that kind of the purpose of a lot of these stories is not to show kids that monsters exist. Kids are very aware that monsters exist. Kids are more aware than we think that monsters exist. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of a lot of those stories is to show kids that monsters can be beaten, that dragons can be beaten, that they're not helpless in the face of, like, not every bad thing is existential gloom, that they have some way to fight back. So what I wanted to do was write poems about monsters that, okay, they can be creepy, but you can go back and read that poem and, you know, there's a laundry ghost poem. And on one hand, you're like, oh, my laundry room is haunted with a ghost. Well, yes, that's very creepy, especially if your laundry room is in the basement and it's dark when you first go in there and the light switch is on the other side of the room, which, by the way, is the proper construction of a laundry room.
Right. Yeah.
Laundry rooms should be creepy. That's just how they are. But on the other hand, the laundry ghost's biggest problem is that it's kind of dingy and it needs a little bleach, and the bleach is up on the top shelf where it can't reach, and also it's a ghost. How would it get the bottle?
That's funny.
So I want a lot of my poems. The giant atomic monster poem, I want it to be a little, that's why I ended it the way I ended it. That poem, I won't spoiler it, but there's a grown up joke in that. And when I say grown up, I don't mean dirty. I just mean like the best Warner Brothers cartoons. There's a joke that the kids won't get that the adults will, probably. Sure. I like monster stories, especially for youngers, to be creepy, because I like giving people that little shiver. I like, as my friends called it, giving her a case of the Wiggins, which I had never heard before. I think it's wonderful. That's kind of what I want. I kind of want you to read something I've written and kind of look back over your shoulder just to be sure I wasn't doing this. I wasn't like Pickman's modeling this whole story for you. But on the other hand, I don't want you to put down the book and have your heart be heavy, because that doesn't do anybody any good. Not you, not me, not
right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So we mentioned that you're an author. We've talked about that you being a creative individual. We've talked about ways that you're creative. And we've been talking about your book, One Hungry Werewolf and Other Monstrous Rhymes. And as Drayton mentioned, now available on Amazon. But what we'd like to do is tell us a little bit more about this book specifically. You know, what type of stories are, you know, I know that they're monster stories, and we talked a little bit about how you framed it, but how did the book come about? What made you sit down and say, I want to write these type of monster stories? You mentioned it a little bit, how you were framing the stories, but what was it specifically that made you want to write this particular book?
Question, is it okay if I go just a little bit long on this answer?
Go ahead.
Sure. Okay. We have time. If you have time.
I do.
There we go.
The first thing is this, in my opinion, this book is at least a lesson to me about how you cannot know when an opportunity will arise as a creative person. That your opportunities, that your job as a creative person is to make stuff. And the more creative things that you do, whether you're an artist, a writer, a podcast, whatever you do, the more things you write, the more opportunities you will have for those things to kind of come together in odd and interesting ways, and even come together with things that other people are doing. So I was one Wednesday night in a Sarah Werner Create Along room, which she does every Wednesdays and Fridays. And I was determined that I wanted to write something, but I didn't really know what I wanted to write. So I sat down, I grabbed my notebook, and I wrote the first stanza of One Hungry Werewolf, just right off the top of my head. goofing around. And I looked at it and went, well, that's kind of cool. Maybe they'll write a counting poem. I'm not a poet, by the way. Well, okay, now I guess I am.
Now you are.
My first book, I keep telling people I'm not really a poet, yet my first book is poetry.
Yeah, you can't say that anymore.
Which, by the way, is not something I would have ever predicted, which is another thing, is that you don't know where things are going to come from. I would never have predicted that my first book would be a children's art book about monsters that's poetry. So I wrote this poem. And I had it sit for a couple, 3 weeks. And a friend of mine, Cedar Sanderson, who is the artist in this book,
excellent,
had just written, she had just done a wonderful project for her younger sister. And her younger sister is developmentally disabled and she's an adult, and they had a series of jokes growing up. And one of the wonderful things they did was that her sister would kind of put her hands up and she would be a cute moose. So Cedar determined that for Christmas, she was going to do a poetry art book herself about a cute moose. And she was going to illustrate it, she was going to publish it, and she was going to have a hard copy in her sister's hands by Christmas. And she actually pulled it together in like 6 weeks.
Great.
Awesome.
Part of that, she asked people, she goes like, look, I need help. I need a bunch of poems about that I need a bunch of words that rhyme with moose. So people started throwing them out on her little Facebook thread. And I wrote this just little goofy poem about how you should drink puce moose juice, but not chartreuse moose juice because that's gross. And just before the book went to print, she dropped me a message and she said, hey, remember that little poem you wrote? And I said, yeah. She goes, I really like it. I want to use it as the end piece to my book. And I did a little illustration, and she hand wrote it out and did a little illustration. She goes, do you mind? I'm like, heck no. I'd be honored. I think it's really cool. And then a little later in the conversation, she said, I'm going to be looking for another art project, because she is primarily a writer and she's written a bunch of books, wonderful books, by the way. If you like she wrote science fiction, she writes urban fantasy. She's a really good author, and our book is actually kind of under her own little publishing house, Imprint, which I absolutely love.
Great.
And she said, I'm going to be looking for another art project because I like to do art. It helps me kind of stay sane. It's the kind of thing I can do. And I said, well, if you're looking for inspiration, I wrote this poem a couple weeks ago, and I don't really think I'm going to be doing anything with it. But if you want, I've got a little Google Doc and you can look at it, and maybe you could just play with some art and use that as a prompt for some art. And she's like, oh, I'd love to. So I linked her to it. She looked at it. And like in the next 10 minutes, she hit me with like 3 art ideas. And I'm like, that's wonderful. I'm really glad that like this is really sparking ideas from you. And then she said, hey, I want to do a book together.
Nice.
I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, like this poem and my illustrations, and we'll do a book together. Sure. I guess if someone says, do you want to do a book together? I kind of, sure. Yeah. All right. And she said, do you have any more? And I went, well, back in October, I had written a bunch of little 1-stanza monster poems. Excuse me. Before that, I had written every day of Halloween week, I had written a little short story that was like a monologue, a little first-person monologue from a monster, and I called them the Monster Logs. One day I'm actually going to get people to record them and like do voice acting for them, and because I think they'd be fun.
I remember you talking about those.
Yeah.
The Monster Logs. And right after that, I did a bunch of little poems called 6 Spooky Stanzas. And I went into like Canva and I found some art and I slapped them up there and I put them on this blog post. And it was like the day after Halloween. And hardly anybody saw them because, you know, I have a blog, but it's not super widely read or anything like that. It's fine. And I said, well, I had these. And she says, all right, well, let me see them. So I looked at it and she hit me with, they were like 6 of them. And she hit me with like 3 great art ideas. She's like, all right, we'll use those too. So next thing you know, there's the book. The Bat family was, she showed me an illustration she was going to do for the legal thing. And I said, that's wonderful. We could do I said, that almost makes me want to write. I said, I remember this. I said, that almost makes me want to write a poem about a family of bats. And she said, nope, you're going to write that.
Yep.
And that's kind of how it came together. It came together because I just had this little thought, I'm just going to write a poem and see what happens. So I wrote it and I tucked it away, and then there's an opportunity.
Nice.
And that opportunity gets a little bit bigger. And it was just, I didn't plan it. And this is going to be maybe unsatisfying to people who are like, you lucked into it. But I'm convinced that if whatever creative endeavor you're in, do as much creating as you can. Don't put the pressure on you like, I gotta do it, right? But it's more, don't listen to that voice in your head that goes, nah, no one, who cares? No one will care. No one will. Look, I wrote a poem on a whim. That's not to say it's not a good poem, because I'm actually really proud of it. It's one of the better things I've ever written.
Nice.
And I worked really hard to make those rhymes rhyme. It's one of the better things I've ever done. After I edit it and whatnot, but there it was. And then like little over a month later, I'm holding an actual book with my name on it in my hands. It's got a poem about werewolves. By the way, if you have the book, I have a favorite in the One Hungry Werewolf poem. I have a favorite werewolf on every page.
Nice.
But my absolute favorite werewolf, if you are looking for the book, there is a page with a bunch of werewolves, and the stanza involves a roadblock, and in that stanza is my absolute favorite werewolf of the whole thing. And once you see the werewolf, and once you look at the page, you will know instantly which one it is and why. It is maybe the happiest werewolf you will ever see in an illustration of werewolves anywhere.
All right,
that's
awesome.
Awesome.
Check that out.
It's like the cycle, it's like Stephen King's cycle of the werewolf book met Animal House. It's the happiest werewolf ever.
That's funny.
I love it.
I love it. But that's okay that you feel that, even if you feel that you lucked into it, or if other people feel that you lucked into it. I find that most of the good things in our lives are things that would come up to us by happenstance.
Yes.
I always tell people that I lucked into marrying my wife. I convinced her to do
you
that.
You definitely got lucky with that one.
You don't have to agree so quickly, Kathleen.
I'm sorry. She's my favorite. I did.
But she's awesome.
She's my favorite.
Most men I know married up, whether they know it or not.
Oh, I know it.
I frequently told my wife that I am convinced that she's not allowed to admit it because there was a secret, there was a code
somewhere, yes,
to which she has to abide by. That there was a point at which the single women in the world drew lots because somebody had to take me out. Someone had to
take one for the team,
me out, deal with me, yeah. And I was like, oh man. And they had like a wake and a ceremony. She's like, no, it's not like that. I'm like, it totally is like that.
Is it How I Met Your Mother that they talk about every relationship having a reacher and a settler?
Yeah. I was the reacher, she was a settler. I always joke that I wore her down like erosion. So that's how I got her.
I just saw a great quote, a story about Winston Churchill's walking along the street with his wife, and she greets the street sweeper, and they have a nice conversation. And Sir Winston asked her, well, who is that? Well, he used to be in love with me, before I met you. She said, well, wow, if you hadn't met me, you might have been married to a street sweeper instead of the prime minister. She said, no, if I hadn't married you, that street sweeper would be prime minister.
Oh, there it is. Nice.
I love that quote.
That is a good quote. So on your Amazon profile, you also mentioned, and you've mentioned already in the podcast, that you enjoy a good fantastic story, but you've realized that there weren't as many new ones as you wanted. So what are some of your favorite fantastic stories that got you started in the genre? And what's your most recent favorite?
I admit I'm catching up. It's really weird. I don't read as much new fiction as I probably should, because there's so much old fiction that I'm still reading. I love Richard Matheson and Ray Bradbury and Charles Beaumont and Jerome Bixby. And Ursula Le Guin. Ursula Le Guin's short stories are beautiful, and they're brilliantly written, but they're just Shirley Jackson's horror stories. Even her stories that she doesn't intend for them to be horror, because she also wrote a lot of just kind of regular domestic life type stories that are almost like essays of her life. She wrote some of those, and some of those you're like, you're reading them and you can hear her voice and you're waiting for the weird, creepy thing to happen. Because it's just I feel like I'm catching up. So Bradbury has so many stories, and I'm still reading through Ray Bradbury's stories. His novel, Something Wicked This Way Comes, you think of him as a science fiction type author, but his novel, Something Wicked This Way Comes, is probably the best, the scariest novel I've ever read.
Okay.
It is, I listened to an audiobook rendition of it, and the scene with the hot air balloon going over the town at night, I actually had to turn it off because I couldn't. It was keeping me awake. I couldn't sleep. It turned me out. It creeped me so bad that I had to go back and listen to it 2 days later during the day.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because that's how creepy it was. If you want short stories that are sharp, they're like a little mean, which is also something I sometimes like to do with a story. Just a story then that just comes out and you don't expect it to come out and get you. It just comes out and just Stephen King's early short story collections.
I love Stephen King.
Night Shift and Skeleton Crew. His early short stories, when he was just a lean and hungry writer trying to make sales to buy his daughter medicine, and he was writing everything he could write just to get it out there. There is a story of his called The Raft that is just wonderful. There is another one of his he did a little later called Poppy, that is a vampire story that comes out of that you don't expect to be a vampire story, and it's really great. It's really, really,
cool.
really great. I'm so catching up for people who have written so much good stuff before that I'll see like M.R. James's ghost stories that I keep coming back to over and over and over again, because they're really quiet and British. And I went into an old church and I found this thing and I decided to bring it home because it was a wonderful curiosity. And then next thing you know, he's being stalked by some horrible being from another dimension. And you're like, well, how did I get here? This story was wonderful and bucolic and romping through the British countryside. And next thing you know, there's a ghost sleeping next to the dude. How did this happen to him? What? That's kind of I'm kind of ashamed that I don't have more modern authors. I like Neil Gaiman. The thing I like most about Neil Gaiman is that I think Neil Gaiman is this generation's right now. I think it's this generation's Ray Bradbury. In that his stories and the stuff he does, it's everywhere. It's superheroes, it's supernatural horror fiction, it's modern fairy tales. He did his own kind of rendition and recorded an audiobook of Norse legends, Norse mythology.
Okay.
Which is, and he reads it, and it's one of the best things I've come across in like 5 years. And it's essentially his own voice retelling Norse mythology. I think the thing I admire about him is that when you pick up a Neil Gaiman book, you cannot be sure exactly what you're getting.
Plus, I would think he gets an A+ just for being able to pronounce all the Norse names.
Oh, and the fact that he does it with kind of the Neil Gaiman accent.
Okay.
And you're like, should that voice be doing Norse? And you wonder, like, the sound and the story don't quite match, but then partially through the first story, you can't imagine you can't imagine that particular story being read by any other person in any other way.
Okay.
And that's the other thing I like about Neil Gaiman, is that a Neil Gaiman story is a Neil Gaiman story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When you read a Neil Gaiman story, and I admit that I do not like everything he writes. I will pick up a short story collection, and I may skip over some stories because I don't like the particular. I don't know whether it is the genre or the tone of the story. I don't necessarily like it. I'll just go ahead and read the next one, and that's fine. But the thing I like about a Neil Gaiman story is that it's always going to be a Neil Gaiman story, and it's only going to be a Neil Gaiman story. No one else can tell a story the way Neil Gaiman can tell a story, and I love that about him. And that is something that you cannot always say about even popular authors. Gaiman is Gaiman, and when you have a Neil Gaiman story in your hand, you don't even have to have his name on it to know it's him.
Yeah, definite style. Yeah, you know, I'm the same way. I really like older works. In fact, one of my favorite authors when I was younger and even to this day is Edgar Allan Poe, and I still go back to his stories and poems because they're just.
I love Edgar Allan Poe.
So amazing, and the wordplay is so wonderful. But I also wanted to ask you about your work in progress. You hinted at a couple of things, and I don't know. You mentioned something about a reference work for monsters. Is that something that you're working on? Or maybe, or if you have some other work in progress that you wanted to tickle our listeners' appetite for?
Yes. I'm a little unlike other authors in that so authors who write novels tend to have a work in progress that they're writing a 30,000 word novel. I tend to write short stories.
Right.
Biggest reason, by the way, is that I have horrible problems with attention and focus. So I have had very, very little luck sustaining a story over like 3 writing sessions. So if I can't write it in 2 writing sessions, I'm going to have super big problems with it. So I found that writing short fiction, flash length fiction, I wrote, I could write 2, sometimes 3 stories a week. And I think they're good stories. They're stories I really like and I'm proud of. And I don't, feel discouraged. I'm starting to move a bit bigger. But right now, the second poetry art book for kids is actually in the works. Cedar Sanderson is doing the art now. She's got some other things because she is, like many of us creative people, she's a creative person who also has a full-time job and family and stuff like that. But she's working on it. That one is going to be not as many poems, but the poems are going to be a little bit longer. It's 3 poems, but that one at least is tentatively titled Larry Was a Gargoyle. And it features the poem Larry Was a Gargoyle, about Larry, who was a gargoyle. I'm not a subtle writer, honestly. I don't go in for the trickery. If you get one of my poems called Larry Was a Gargoyle, you can be sure that it's going to be about Larry, who was a gargoyle. But she is doing the art for that now, and I have seen actually the first 2 lines of the poem are Larry was a gargoyle who wore a jaunty hat. So and I have seen a picture of the jaunty hat, and it is indeed the jauntiest hat you have ever seen. So we have that to look forward to.
Yeah, my favorite bit of trivia is, where the name gargoyle came from was the noise. They were downspouts, and so the name comes from the gurgling noises that they made. So that's where that comes from. And
I like that.
And did not know that.
If it isn't a downspout, then it's actually a grotesque. It's not a gargoyle. So that was my little trivia for you.
I did know that second part of the trivia. I didn't know that was where the word came from, though.
Now, one thing I wanted to mention, if you ever do, I don't know if this will help you in your writing stories. One thing that I think is sadly lacking in the world of monsters is like definite instructions or some sort of compendium of the ticklish spots on various monsters. I mean, where do you tickle a werewolf? Where do you tickle a vampire? Where do you tick? I mean, that's something people need to know this stuff. So if
I would say that the first part of this, Alan, the first part of the difficulty in tickling a werewolf is getting close enough to a werewolf to tickle it.
Right. But if you have the opportunity, you may as well take it.
If you're in melee, you might as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're actually kicking around a third book right now, which is going to be aquatic poems and excuse me, mermaids, krakens. Somehow there's a cat. I don't know how that's going to work in there, but that's a specific request from an artist that
not
a
mermaid with a cat, but a cat.
No, actual cat. I actually have kind of a list of things that I want to do because I have recurring characters and whatnot who recurred in my stories.
Mm-hmm.
So I will be doing. I don't know exactly when, but I've got a superhero team that I've written 3 stories about now called the Trouble Team. And they consist of Exemplar, Gecko the Great, and B Sharp, who is Gecko the Great is Exemplar is kind of your good-hearted Superman type of guy, though not exactly. And Gecko the Great is a cross between Gecko and Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. And B Sharp is a young African-American woman whose father is kind of wealthy, and she's part of the team because they bought their vehicle from her. It's called the Trouble Truck, and it's an old VW bus. And they bought it because Gecko the Great really wanted to be able to play Foghat from the speakers, and it had a bumping stereo. So,
right.
But she also has a problem that she picked this really cool name of B Sharp because she dresses in black and yellow like a bee, and she's good with knives, so she's got stingers. But everybody expects her to be musical based, or her powers to be musical based, or for her to sing a lot,
as opposed to B flat, right?
Right. So she's a little she has to kind of overcome the fact that people expect her to be musical and not to do this. And then the second group I have is an old guy named Red, who is a monster hunter kind of in the Appalachian backwoods, a little south, a little southeast, kind of that. And his cat named Hosanna. And Hosanna is a specially trained cat who, when we first meet Hosanna, knows Tai Chi. And Hosanna is a cat who's specially trained to hunt out horrible creatures in the night and to slay them.
My cats are slackers.
Hosanna knows in the initial story called, I actually saw on my website, called The Cat Who Danced. Hosanna is doing Tai Chi out on a fence post.
I can say that's a great image.
It's actually I want to confirm something real quick.
You know, in my mind this whole time, all I keep hearing is Shaggy talking to B Sharp and like yoink Sharp.
He's kind of like Shaggy, and he's kind of tall and thin and really kind of hippie-ish, and he says things like dude a lot, and
nice.
Yeah, it's what can I say? I came up with a name, Gecko the Great, and I thought that Gecko the Great would be a great name for a superhero. And then I tried to imagine the person who would least embody Gecko the Great. And I thought it was this tall, lanky, hippie type. And then once I had him, I realized that their vehicle, the Trouble Truck, was gonna be a VW microbus. Do you guys, I don't want to necessarily put you on a spot, so no is a perfectly appropriate answer, but do you mind if I read The Cat Who Danced?
Not at all.
It's not a very long story. Do you mind?
Go ahead.
Okay. Hey, Red, is that your cat on the fence post? Yep, Red said. Probably so. He didn't even look up from the disassembled pistol he was cleaning on his kitchen table. He held his head low, the tip of his beard tantalizingly close to the oiled metal. Royce stood next to the sink and looked out the window, a glass of Red's best whiskey in his hand. He took a long sip and watched as 100 or so feet away, a cat stood on its hind legs on a fence post. The bright full moon sat behind it on the horizon and obscured any detail. All Royce could see was its lean and furry silhouette up on its hind legs. That alone would have been odd enough, but the cat was not standing still. It appeared to be dancing. Hey, Red, let me try that question another way, Royce said as he drained the glass and set it on the counter. Is that your cat dancing on the fence post? Red looked up this time and squinted out the window where the cat had spun itself gracefully on one paw, its ears alert, its tail low and relaxed. I don't reckon she's dancing. I reckon she's doing Tai Chi. Royce was momentarily dumbfounded. Your cat knows Tai Chi? Yep, knows it pretty well, too. Got herself a black belt. Ain't you ever noticed her collar? Royce leafed through his memories. As it happens, I did notice that fancy collar. Even asked you about it on account of how fancy it is. I don't recall you ever answered. And I didn't answer you because you didn't need to know. Still don't really, but I might as well tell you since you're going to hunt that slash dog thing with us. That cat's special. Maybe only 3 or 4 in the whole world now. She's bred to find and hunt evil things like what killed Clem Fastman last week and what's been stalking the old meadows since then. But Tai Chi? Roy shook his head. That's a lot to believe, friend. I'll bind evil things in a slash dog, but that? He gestured out the window. The cat lashed out quickly with both forepaws. Its claws caught the silver moonlight and flashed like the scythe of death itself. Red finished assembling the gun and shrugged again. Believe it or don't, you old coot. Fact is, Hosanna came right from a holy place. I can't tell you where, but you'd know it if you heard. She's been trained as much as you can train a cat, and art so deadly I ain't even heard much of half of them. Some of them you can't even learn because you ain't a cat. You know she's different. Tonight, I expect she'll show you just how different. Now stop, John, and get that alley cannon. Roy shook his head and picked up the shotgun. The silver inlaid cross of the stock gleamed under the incandescent light of Red's kitchen. You ready? Red stuck the pistol, known only as Red's gun, into his special-made shoulder holster. Roy shrugged. Guess I am. Prayers all said. Got holy water in the Chevy? Yep, Red said, and reached past Royce to tap the window. Outside, Hosanna the cat lowered herself to 4 paws, leaped down from the fence post, and looked toward them as she ran to the battered blue Chevy pickup truck. Royce would have sworn the cat was smiling.
All right, Jimmie, we have gotten to the point of our show where now we need to throw some questions at you. We mentioned earlier that you were a Jeopardy contestant. Even if you weren't a Jeopardy winner, you still got on the show, which means you're probably smarter than the other 3 of us on the screen. So we have what we call the quiz of randomness. So in this quiz of randomness, there'll be 5 questions. Each question will be presented to you with multiple choice answers. Okay, so we're making it a little easier on you.
Good.
Unless we think you're getting close to winning and you just, you blow through the first couple, then we're going to make you answer on your own. But so out of the 5 questions, if you get 3 of them correct, we want to send you one of these handy dandy I gave to the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans coffee mugs. Okay, and as Drayton showed, it even has our really super cool logo on the background. If you get 4 out of 5 questions right, we're going to send you that mug along with Drayton's book, Custodians of the Cosmos. So.
Ooh. And I want to interject something. Since you like short stories, I'm going to throw in my assemble of novelettes, which is the beer fiction series of stout tales about a man who finds a miraculous beer, and it's kind of a hysterical fiction. So
I have looked for miraculous beer in the past and have not found it.
Yeah, well, it's in this book, so
those are pretty entertaining. And if so if you get 4 out of 5, we'll make sure that that Drayton sends those to you. We'll have them vandalize them with a little bit of calligraphy even. Okay, but now, however, so if those are the good consequences, if you get 2 out of 5, there has to be what we like to call a fun sequence. And what that is we take a picture of your face, we make a meme out of you, and we share it with our group. Do you agree to those terms?
I do.
All right. Well, very good. We are underway here. Then Drayton, go ahead and fire off a
question numero 1. In what state does Stranger Things take place? This is multiple choice. So is it A, Indiana, B, Ohio, or C, Michigan?
Is it Indiana?
Correct. Very good.
Hawkins,
Yes,
Indiana.
number one.
I remember the city. I'm like, Hawkins, crap, where?
It's not Ohio because Ohio is not cool enough for that.
Right. And there you go.
And we live in Michigan, so, you know.
Question 2. In the show Hannah Montana, this actor/singer plays the role of the father. Is it A, Garth Brooks, B, John Bon Jovi, or C, Billy Ray Cyrus?
C, Billy Ray Cyrus.
It is.
Scoot your boots. Yeah.
All right. There's 2 out of 3.
All right. Now to history. What is the oldest inhabited city in the world? Is it A, Jerusalem, B, Damascus, or C, Baghdad?
C, Baghdad.
Ooh, it was Damascus.
Damascus.
Good guess. I mean, those are all tough ones. That was a tough one. I wouldn't have got that one.
Yes.
Question 4. Which American comedy series has won a record 37 Emmy Awards? Is it Seinfeld, The Simpsons, or Frasier?
37 Emmys, you say?
I'm listening for your answer.
I'm going to say The Simpsons.
Wrong. It's
Frasier.
Frasier.
It's
Is
Frasier.
it really?
Yeah.
I tried to give you a little help there, Jimmy.
Yeah.
I would have never guessed that.
I didn't.
Really?
I was actually very surprised by that one myself when I was doing the research. I was like, really? 37? No kidding. Okay.
Wow.
I like Frasier. I thought it was a great show. I didn't realize that they had won that many.
I didn't know it was that great of a show.
Right? Well,
That's me too. It's okay, but
yeah.
Well, I think they won a lot for writing, scores. It wasn't just for the actors and things along those lines. So
yeah. And see, I thought The Simpsons, if nothing else, would have won for some technical stuff since they've been around since approximately 1957.
Right, since the beginning of time.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
maybe
what the shows it was up against too.
All right. So far you've gotten
2
out of 4. So
right.
Here's your chance to avoid meme land.
I know.
All right. And I got to make sure I pronounce this correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong here. Cynophobia.
Sure. Sounds good to me.
That's good.
Cynophobia is the fear of A, dogs, B, the color blue, or C, gerbils.
CYNO, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I'm going to say gerbils.
And I'm going to say, please smile pretty for the camera.
So close.
So close.
Was it blue?
No, it's actually dogs.
Dogs. I didn't know that.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. The prefix would not have had led me to dogs.
Right? I would think canine or something, but that.
Well, or something, or the Latin, because a lot of this comes from Latin roots, the Latin root for dog.
Huh. Yeah, I honestly, when I saw it, I thought it was going to be for the blue, the cyan.
Because it's Greek.
Yeah.
Oh, it comes from Greek.
And I went away from blue because blue is cyan. That's why I wanted to pick the fact of spelling.
No,
I just looked it up because I'm like, wait, what is the root word there? Yeah, it's Greek.
So
I knew that one.
So the biggest question here is, did I get my research right? It is dogs, right?
It is dogs.
Yeah.
Yay! All right. So okay. I didn't.
Well.
All right. Well, I snapped some pictures of you, so we'll share those.
And I'm going to still send you my books because I think you'd really enjoy them.
Alan, that is very sweet of you. Thank you.
Well, sure.
All right. So yeah. So our game results, the official game results, is that Jimmie is our newest resident of Meme Land. You're in good company though. One of our other meme recipients is Dan Povenmire, the co-creator of Phineas and Ferb.
Oh, so, I love him.
Yeah, Dan was an awesome interview as well. And we have Frank Duran from the Warp Shelf podcast. Another great guy. great geek podcast. If you want to listen to some cool geek talk, go check out the Warp Shelf. But so those two guys, and I think we have a third one.
Well, that wasn't Sarah. Sarah got him.
Oh yeah,
she schooled us.
So, but yeah, so you're in good company. That's a good place to be. But
me and Dan Povenmire, I'll take it.
There you go.
Exclusive club there.
It's rarefied air, Jimmy.
Yeah, Jimmy, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. This has been a blast.
Now, make sure tell everybody where they can go to find out about your books and all your work and everything you're up to that you want them to support.
The easiest, two places that are the easiest to get it. My website is Jimmie with an IE. JimmieWrites.com is my website. Okay. I also have a mailing. I also do a newsletter every week.
Great.
It's a weekly newsletter. It's called Thursday. Actually, it's called Thursday because it has an exclamation point. Thursday, and it comes out on Wednesday every week. Because Wednesday is not as cool a name for a newsletter as Thursday.
It's really not.
But Thursday is not as good a day to put out a newsletter as Wednesday. So I decided to opt for the two best choices and do a newsletter on Wednesday called Thursday.
I love it.
And you can get through that through Tiny Letter, which is tinyletter.com/Jimmie Writes, like my website. And like I said, once a week, there are some links to my stories, and I write a little essay, often about creativity, and there's some arts and letters because I like to attempt to be smart. There's a little culture, as they say.
Excellent.
We will make sure that we put those in the description so that people can find them and your other works.
Thank you.
Yeah, we also want to remind people that subscribing is the single most important thing you can do to ensure that we get more amazing guests like the wonderful Jimmie Bise here, and that you have funny moments to listen to. So please subscribe. It's going to help more than you ever think it will. And be sure to check out Jimmie, his works, his books, and go to JimmieWrites.com to find out a little bit more about him as well. And also, if you're not happy with the content of today's video, all you have to do is submit, in duplicate, of course, to our head complaint specialist, who's named Emperor Palpatine. But he does prefer to talk person to person, usually at an opera. And don't worry if he brings up other former complaint submissions and how they didn't know the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise. But whatever he suggests, I'm sure his solution will be electrifying, as always.
Very late. Thanks again, Jimmie.
Goodbye, everyone, and thanks for watching.
Thanks, Jimmie. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Our show is brought to you by our charity sponsor, the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans Fund, which supports the Wish Upon a Teen Foundation that helps out sick kids when they need it most. Just imagine the comfort you'll give Red Shirt crewman number 24. He'll know that when he puts on the red shirt and is dragged below the sea by the Kraken 15 minutes into the mission, that he didn't leave his family destitute and without hope, because the Red Shirt Widows and Orphans Fund has his back and his life preserver.
On behalf of the rest of the hosts of Funny Science Fiction, we'd like to thank you for listening to this episode. If you'd like to be a guest on one of our future episodes, please contact us by means of our Facebook group, Funny Science Fiction. You can find us on Twitter or Instagram using the handle @FunnySci-Fi, or you can go to DraytonAllen.com and click the Contact Me link at the bottom of the page. Thanks again. Hope you enjoyed the episode.
Copyright 2020 by Drayton Allen. Original music by Jordan Michaels. Reference to any specific product or entity mentioned in this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation of or by Funny Science Fiction or its sponsors. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. If you have questions about this disclaimer, please contact us via email at DraytonAllen@DraytonAllen.com.